Okay, good afternoon everyone. I feel like I need a hat up here, it's a bit hard to see. Look, this presentation really aims to give you a snapshot and a flavour of what's happening in the Hunter region with recycled organics. So I'd really like to point out the great work being done by councils in the region, for starters, and to show how we can support and value add to that through the regional strategy implementation. So this is really primarily a council perspective on municipal organics issues. There's a lot probably that I'm not aware of in the region that's happening with the industry and in the commercial sector. It's such a broad field really, but so this is the council perspective on things. I guess everybody's aware of the numerous benefits of recycled organics, and some of our previous speakers have really touched on that and explained it well. Everything from minimising waste to landfill, minimising methane emissions, closing the loop on a great resource, getting materials back into the productive economy, sequestering carbon. I mean, the list is pretty endless really on the benefits of recycling organics. And I think more broadly, I guess my interest has been in building biodiversity from the soil upwards, and it's interesting hearing the previous speakers talking about that too, growing soils, looking at soil life, and treating this not just as a waste or a resource recovery issue, but having much broader implications for ecosystem health. And again, there are those figures on soil carbon content in Australia pre-1788, 5 to 10 times higher than they are nowadays, where soils were spongy and resilient and absorbent and strong, and if we can look at getting some of that back into our agricultural sector, that would be a really great outcome. I also think it's really important to tackle the issue from the grassroots upwards, so right from home composting up to the commercial and industrial scale. There was a great talk at the AORA conference by a woman, Sally Brown, last year from Washington Uni, and she articulated that whole idea really well. So I guess there's no grand thesis here, but I'm going to attempt to give you a really good overview with a lot of material about what's going on in the region in 20 minutes. So we'll look a bit at regional context, what's happening with councils in terms of collection systems, processing systems, some of the new contracts that are just coming online at the moment, some of the regional value-adding activities that we've been undertaking, with regional capacity building, natural disaster planning, some organics forums, and getting the EPA up to the region to really see what's happening and be able to have a bit of a dialogue with councils, and try and look a bit at our shared learnings and where we're going to take this from here. So obviously my role is to coordinate the implementation of the Hunter Regional Strategy, and really what we're trying to stress in the strategy is that it's a collaborative process. We're not working in the region doing something separate to councils. We're really trying to collaborate and mesh and work with the councils in a really coordinated fashion. We're a new region. We're not one of the Renew regions, one of the voluntary regional waste groups. So we've had 3 years where we think we've set up some really good systems and processes and built relationships and really enhanced our collaboration. But, this is just a springboard for the future. So, hopefully the regional approach doesn't cease in the next 4 years like the previous sort of waste board era came and went. We're hoping to try and make it more of a sustainable approach to managing waste. So it's a really challenging and interesting role to try and develop that shared approach. And what's come out of our evaluation of the strategy at the moment is that councils and all of the other stakeholders involved are really keen to look at governance and how we mesh our regional strategy with integrated planning and reporting and other council processes, so that there's not a disconnect between the regional strategy and what's happening in the councils. It's a holistic approach. So just looking at some of the strategy links to organics in our first version of the strategy, which is just finishing, this gave us a really good groundwork to be wide-ranging, I guess, in how we approached organics. We can look at supporting collection, processing and market development. And I think the councils rightly see themselves as waste managers, not processors or marketers, but that's perhaps where we can really try and add some value to the process in that side of things. So in terms of funding, Waste Less Recycle More has been really beneficial to our region in terms of organics funding. So councils have attracted about $6.9 million in organics funding. Industry and consultants around $3 million. So pretty much $10 million in total has come into the region in the last 3 years to enhance our approach to collecting and processing and managing organics, as well as looking at the market development side of things. So this is our region. It's a big region. We've got 9 councils and it's 22,000 square kilometres. It's a really diverse region. The threat of amalgamations is almost over. There still might be a bit of action in that space, I think, coming up, but and that's really slowed a lot of things down, I guess, and I'll try and touch on that a bit later on in the presentation. So, very diverse region, geographically and demographically. 55% of our population's in Newcastle and Lake Macquarie. The majority of the population within 25 kilometres of the coast. And, the smaller councils like Upper Hunter and Muswellbrook obviously have a lot less income, a lot less staff and resources to work on this than the bigger coastal councils. So just starting to look at a few of the tonnages and a few of the stats. We have had a good data collection system, and we've had a big focus on data in the region, but all of our stats are from the annual war survey at the moment. So the region generated 351,000 odd tonnes in 15-16. About 136,000 of those were recycled, of which 51,000 were organic. So we were at around about a 40% regional recycling rate, so a long way to go to the 70% target. And organics is really one of the big ticket items to help us get there. I think how we portray this information to people in the community is always important, and trying to simplify it. People don't relate to tonnes particularly easily, but we used the EPA Recyculator to great success recently and got a fair bit of media coverage. So our recovery or recycling rate was the equivalent to removing 19,000 cars from the road, 65,000 annual households' energy use, 901 Olympic swimming pools of water, and 3.7 million wheelie bins saved from landfill. So that was a good hook for NBN News, who came knocking, and so we actually at the moment trying to develop a whole lot more interesting and simple infographics so that we can pitch the information back to elected reps and GMs and decision makers in a sort of easily digestible manner. So just thinking about the current organics collection services, really all of our councils are lucky to have landfill sites, 8 out of the 9, and or transfer stations, so there's a big opportunity for self-haul. Newcastle and Muswellbrook really led the way with garden organics collection services a few years ago, and Port Stephens Council for a long time has had the AWT Bedminster system, so they're recovering materials out of the waste stream, and organics is a large proportion of those. We've just had curbside garden organics come in. Interestingly, it's a joint procurement contract, which I've just been listening to people talking about as well, with Cessnock, Singleton and Maitland councils, and I'll talk a bit more about that service in a minute. So there's quite a few councils planning to go to full FOGO collections soon. Lake Macquarie next year, and I'll talk about that a bit more later on too. Organics cleanups, and like I said, just one going to AWT recovery. So the current processing systems, a lot of the councils were doing it themselves or on their site, run by industry and processors. Predominantly open windrow for a long time, but the council's moving to ANL. I've just been talking to Matt from ANL outside. I wasn't 100% sure what process they were going to be using, but it's an aerated in-floor system he's been telling me about. So I'll be interested to learn a lot more about that and go to the ANL site and see what they're actually doing. Like I said, Suez is taking the Port Stephens material through their alternative technology facility. Newcastle Council has just gone to Better Grow, and some of the smaller councils are processing it themselves in-house. So looking at the tonnages, at 11-12 is our baseline year, and you can see it's a bit of a lumpy diagram there going up through 12-13, 13-14. Big jump in 13-14 when Lake Macquarie introduced their garden organics service. And then an even bigger jump in 14-15 when we had the Hunter Superstorm, so massive East Coast low. And it dropped back again in 15-16. But looking at a few projections with the new garden organic services coming on in over the next couple of years, and potentially councils going to full FOGO as well, we might be collecting up around about 100,000 tonnes in a relatively short period of time. So there are a lot of implications there for processing and market development and what's going to happen with all of those materials. just to give you a bit more of a fine-grained look at the council tonnages, you can see there the big disparity between the large and the small councils, I suppose, in terms of their tonnages of organics collected. And I put in the little red line up here to indicate Port Stephens, this was the self-haul organics to their sites, but also what they're processing through the Bedminster system, because a large proportion of that is organics, and they're getting between 11 and 13,000 tonnes a year. And I'm not sure exactly what proportion of that is organics, but it's quite a high amount. So the Hunter Superstorm a couple of years ago was a real catalyst to action. It was fairly chaotic. There was a massive amount of organics generated and cleaned up and shredded and stockpiled on licensed and unlicensed sites all over the shop. So there were 140 kilometre-hour winds, 50% of the annual rainfall in 3 days, massive waves, flooding, power outages and loss of life, unfortunately, in Dungog. Mobile coverage completely dropped out, so it was a fairly chaotic situation. I mean, these disasters are getting more and more common. We've just had Cyclone Debbie, the northeast flooding in New South Wales, and I heard an interesting story on the radio the other day. They were talking about the clean-up in Lismore after the floods, and just the psychology of getting the waste off the streets quickly for the community in terms of recovery is really important, just feeling like there's something is changing. And, waste management's obviously a really important part of that. And I unfortunately had my first performance review in my job in the middle of this storm, and I drove 90 kilometres up the freeway from Gosford to near Newcastle, got to work, and there was no one there, the lights were out. It was a chaotic drive, there were trees everywhere, and then I had to turn around and drive back through it again. So that was a good lesson, I guess. Don't turn up to your performance appraisal unless you need to. So we'll be looking a bit more at the disaster recovery response in the presentation. So just going into the council services at the moment. So this is really the big ticket item that's happened in our region lately, and I think all the councils are represented here today. So Maitland and Singleton and Cessnock have gone into a new 14-year contract for garden organics collection, looking to go to full FOGO collections in year 7, if not before. I think there's a bit of an appetite to perhaps do it earlier if that's possible. Collection by Solo, and there's going to be a transfer station at Kurri or Weston. A&L are processing at Tea Gardens, and Better Grow are taking some of the self-haul materials to their Ravensworth site. So it's been going only for a month, I think now. The figures I had was there was only 0.3% contamination, and they're looking at an annual tonnage for the 3 councils combined of around about 25,000 tonnes, including self-haul. So that's been very successful and a big win for the region, and congratulations to those councils for all the hard work they've done on that too. So, like I mentioned before, Lake Macquarie is looking to go to full FOGO collections next year, but that's contingent on the new Remondis facility being up and running at Awabba, and there have been some issues with that site. They've had mine subsidence, all sorts of other planning issues and approvals and hurdles, and one of the big learnings we've had, I guess, in the last couple of years is that the infrastructure grants, really need to consider the timeframes that councils have to go through to get new facilities up and running and licensed and operational. There's been a few, I think, tricky moments for some of the councils in looking at perhaps having to give back their money, but as I'll talk about a bit later, the tour we had with the EPA to the region really helped iron out a few of those problems as well. Newcastle have gone, again, they've been quite delayed because of threat of amalgamations and other things, but they've gone to community consultation to see what the community thinks about FOGO. Upper Hunter has a fantastic site next door to their landfill site. It's got a lot of other feedstocks and inputs. There's abattoirs, meat and small goods factories, sale yards, manure, straw. So that, they're set up to run perhaps a small-scale sort of niche composting operation, but there's a great opportunity there. Muswellbrook are running a really successful operation at the moment at their current site, and local land services are interested in using their materials, and they've been doing a trial on commercial food waste collections as well. So I guess these were just some of the quick considerations, and other people have I know there was the MRA workshop on the first day looking at all of the issues you need to consider in getting a food waste or full FOGO collection up and running, but funding approval and timeframes really critical. So you'll see here Robin Parker, who was the minister and the local member at the time at Maitland. This is a couple of years ago, but I think that was when they announced the funding, council funding for collections. So, you know, these things all take time. Education lead time, really crucial, obviously. Changes to residential bin sizes, should you downsize from a 240 or not? You know, when do you deliver your bins? And I think that the current new service that's gone out with Singleton, Maitland and Cessnock, they've really jumped on people where there have been contamination problems, and they've been very active with that community engagement side of things. In terms of disaster management, obviously climate change, frequency and intensity of events is a big issue, and looking at total regional capacity and how to link across councils with managing waste in those scenarios. So just thinking about some of the value-adding stuff we've been doing with councils over the last few years, and it's just been an ongoing focus where we've chipped away pretty consistently. Capacity building has been quite a successful component of our regional strategy, I think, and, you know, looking at the recycled organic side of things is only one of the opportunities we were giving to councils. So, but this was great. Angus Johnston from KMH delivered a few workshops. We had 30 participants, operational staff from 7 councils, developed a transferable resource. And that's really comprehensive. It covered facility management, compliance, compost science, pasteurisation, quality control, testing, and really synthesised Angus's learnings and some of the good stuff that's come out of UNSW ROU over the years. And that was a very good resource for councils, and we'd be happy to share that as well. So one of the other things we did after the Hunter Superstorm in 2015, and we did get great support from the EPA and from Steve Beeman to assist us getting these workshops set up, we tried to pull in as many stakeholders into the room as possible to look at what were the issues and what were some of the solutions. And we came up with 2 key issues, the storm-generated stockpiles and what was going to happen to them, because a lot of them were sitting around in parks and gardens. There were potential leachate problems, you know, some potential to attract a lot of illegal dumping. But there was also the bigger picture of developing markets for recycled organics and an agreement on the need for a high-level disaster guideline. So I think that's going to be one of the first jobs in the new strategy, and I know I've spoken to a few other people about that. For local government, that'll be an interesting tool. Yeah, okay. We'll blast through these last few. So we had a series of natural disaster forums in Feb 2016. You can see on the left-hand side some of the issues we need to consider in that planning. Interestingly, once you get into the world of disaster planning and management, the acronyms get incredibly confusing, and you go from LEMOs and REMOs to half of the acronyms I can't even remember. But waste is a consequence of all of the 21 identified hazards in the local emergency management planning templates. So, but they don't really refer to waste very clearly. They go, oh, councils will sort out waste management issues. It's very vague, so we're looking to try and link responses back to those. Identified needs are on the right from our workshop, and enhanced communications was a really crucial thing that came out of that. Great example from Newcastle City Council, where they nailed internal and external communications across the board as a result of that event. So the EPA tour in September, you know, really this is where I think the regional coordinators play a key role. We're like translators between the EPA and local government, and facilitating that two-way flow of information. That's the really crucial, activity that we can undertake, and that's one of the most useful things I think we do. So we had a tour in September 2016, 2-day tour visiting 6 sites across the region. So there were great responses from the EPA, and I think Amanda, really her biggest learning was to modify the grant processes to allow people to have the time and the space to get their projects up and running. You know, councils themselves, it was really just the face-to-face stuff that the councils wanted. They wanted the EPA to understand what was happening at their site and have a realistic perspective on it. We tried, this is out at Muswellbrook, and we tried to get EPA compliance staff on site at the same time too, to head off any future issues about the composting processes that were being undertaken. So I think Scott Smith, who was around earlier, he wanted that, he relished the opportunity to have those open and frank discussions with the EPA. They've since decided too that they're going to be putting a time-lapse camera in to look at the development of the new site at Awabba. Local land services had been burnt about 10 years ago with contaminated composts and asbestos in it, and so they want to know the source, they want to know the quality, they want to, really important to get that out there. Got a couple more slides. Will it matter if I go a minute over? Okay, I'll blast through. So we're doing 3 pieces of research at the moment. The first one, the Axiom research, it's going as we speak, where we're looking at agricultural market research, 300 farmers in the valley, but looking at which size and type of enterprise provides the greatest opportunity for compost use. An estimate of the hectares to be treated, the best communication solution, and I guess this is the big point. A lot of other people have talked about this in different presentations too. Agronomists, one way or another, may be our greatest asset in communicating to farmers and about the types of products and the ways they can be used and what some of their needs are. There's been a couple of other bits of research that have really informed that and the development of the tool in that third bit with the Wild Blue Global initial research. So obviously there's quite a few market segments. The highlighted ones are the ones we'd be looking at in more detail. Really interesting where you find promotion for compost end use. The one on the left is the Coalface. It's a mining newspaper that I picked up when I was getting a sandwich the other day. There it is, Suez, promoting their rehab products. On the right, Seawise, I was in WA recently, and this was just in the local paper, looking at use of recycled organics in the wheat belt. So really surprising where you come across interesting information. And I guess just to finish up, where we're going to go to is to look at, building on the achievements so far in the first 3 years, in our next 4 years of strategy implementation, put some of the research findings into action, look at an evaluating approach, keep facilitating that local and state understanding, really try and get people to have a regional lens, not just a local lens in their planning processes, and draw on learnings from other places. I went to the WAMA disaster forum last year, and South Australia seems to be state government really ahead of the game in terms of planning for disasters. So thanks for your time. Sorry I went a bit over, and thank you.